Okay, welcome everybody to our 2026 South African social media landscape report. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Ornico team, Ed, Wanga, Jess, putting this report together, and I really understand the work that goes into it. But welcome to this year's addition to what I believe is the most important conversation we'll have this year about the future of social media marketing in South Africa. Firstly, thank you for joining us to unpack this, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to our panelists. Arthur Goldstuck, which I'm sure you all know, he's been the partner of the social media landscape report together with Ornico for the last, as far as I remember, since the start. Arthur is the CEO of Worldwide Works. Dr. Mark Nasila, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at FNB Risk. Jazili Dlamini from Ask Africa, and again, thanks Ask Africa and TGI for the data. I mean, TGI's data is absolutely incredible in terms of understanding customer journeys, understanding demographics, and I really believe all marketers should actually utilize that data. Karen Denny, Divisional Executive at Digital Marketing at Standard Bank Group, and Tumelo Motengwe, Senior Media Manager at Old Mutual. Guys, thank you very much for being on the panel. And I just need everybody, please, just any questions that you may have to either Arthur or to the panel, please put it in the group and we'll ask it a little later. So Arthur is going to give us some insights and understanding the digital transformation and has been doing this for decades in our market. But why does this report matter right now? We're living through what is a profound paradox. On the one hand, we have nearly 41 million South Africans active on social media, a landscape that's never been bigger or more sophisticated. Our research shows that 88% of marketers are now using AI daily. We're automating, optimizing, and scaling like never before. But here's a contradiction that should make us all pause. 62% of consumers openly distrust fully machine-generated content. Think about that for a moment. We're automating ourselves into efficiency utopia, only to discover that the very audiences we're trying to reach are turning away from our optimized inputs. That is the AI paradox, and it's reshaping everything we thought we knew about effective marketing. The numbers tell an absolutely fascinating story. ChatGPT is used by 72% of brands for current production. TikTok has surged to 37% of brand adoption. LinkedIn now dominates at 88% penetration. But what about effectiveness ratings? They've softened across the board. Budget constraints are now cited by 40% of marketers, up from 28% last year. And perhaps the most telling, 30% of you report that your senior management still does not fully understand why we're using social media. But this report isn't about doom and gloom. It's about finding that human edge. Our research reveals something remarkable. South African brands using heritage storytelling, those unpolished, honest narratives rooted in shared human experience, are dramatically outperforming these high glossy AI-rendered narratives. Authenticity, as has been forever, is becoming is the competitive advantage in an age of algorithmic perfection. Today, we're going to explore what this means practically. How do we measure the human quotient, that authentic connection that remains after the machines have done their work? I'm genuinely excited about this conversation because the insights you'll hear today aren't theoretical. They're grounded in data from South Africa's marketing and media professionals, real consumer behavior patterns, the lived experience of navigating this transformation. So let's dive in. Have a look. We're going to unpack it, and I promise you'll leave with actionable strategies, not just food for thought. So Arthur, if you're ready, give us your insights into this year's social media landscape.
Thank you, Oresti, and it's great to be chatting with you all once again. I think this must be the 15th year that we are releasing a social media landscape report for South Africa. So it's great to be part of such a long tradition of research in one area. Also great to be partnering with Ornico once again, and also with Ask Africa and their TGI survey, because our consumer data comes from the 24,000 people that Ask Africa interviews every year for the target group index. Just reflecting for a second on what Oresti had to say, I was delighted with your comments, Oresti, because the question I get asked most often when I give talks to corporate audiences is, how do we come across as authentic when everyone thinks AI is producing our content? Well, that is something that we can leave for the panel discussion. I'm going to give you the context in which people are asking that question. And the context, firstly, is the industry survey we conducted among South Africa's biggest brands. More than 100 companies participate in the survey every year, and it gives a great insight into how brands and corporations are using social media in South Africa. And I would say not the biggest surprise of all, but one that keeps surprising people, is the resurgence and the strength of LinkedIn in the last couple of years. So this was last year's industry survey, which showed LinkedIn for the first time becoming the most commonly used social media platform amongst corporations. It shot from 72% to 85% last year, overtaking Facebook at 83%. But let's look at this year. And if you can see that, unfortunately, it's not so clear on the slide, but you'll be able to download the report subsequent and you can see the detail of it. But LinkedIn has gone up to 88% of corporations using it, whereas Facebook has slipped further down to the 70% or within the 70%. And that's the big story amongst brands using social media in South Africa. Instagram is still strong, but also slipping. And the same with all the other social platforms. LinkedIn is becoming the de facto default for corporations wanting to speak to their audiences. And then of those who are not using social media, or at least not using those platforms, which of these do they plan to be active on in the next 12 months? So bear in mind, this is a percentage of those not using it. And LinkedIn, only 12% are not using it. But of those 12%, 21%, one-fifth, are planning to use in the next 12 months. Of those not using TikTok, 24%. So TikTok has got the highest proportion of non-users planning to use it. But there isn't a vast gap between TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and WhatsApp in terms of those planning to use it. Also, people planning to use apps in general. It all ranges from 17 to 24%. So you can see that there's a general intention to use these platforms. And when there's such a generalized intention, it doesn't usually translate very aggressively into action. But for LinkedIn, it did translate in the past year. And then we look at short video platforms. And what's really interesting here is how each of the platforms has either fallen or remained stable in use. But what's significant is to see how dramatically Facebook Reels has dropped as Instagram has become the default within the Meta world. So Facebook Reels almost giving up the Reels conversation in favor of Instagram. TikTok remaining stable in terms of their regular usage, but again, TikTok stories dropping back in favor of TikTok Reels. And then Snapchat almost disappearing completely from this particular conversation. And then where are you spending most of your social media advertising budget? That's really where the rubber hits the road for the platforms themselves. They don't mind if someone else is winning their social media activity as long as they get the budget. And yeah, Facebook remains the strongest. But what's really fascinating is the extent to which Facebook has dropped in popularity this year from 40% to 37%. Not a big drop, still quite a bit higher than the year before. But at the same time, we've seen LinkedIn jump from 25% to 36%, which is the highest level that they've yet achieved. And that tells you that the advertising budgets are following the social media activity, a slight lag, but probably in the next year, you'll see LinkedIn becoming the number one platform for spending social media advertising budget, likely to overtake Facebook. But you never know. If Facebook gets the act together, becomes more reliable and more trustworthy, then you might see it regain some of its luster. But Meta isn't crying too loudly because Instagram has jumped from 12% to 17%, which is the highest level of corporate social spending that it has yet achieved. X recovered slightly, but still low down there at 4%. And they're not going to recover until their image of toxicity is beaten back to some extent. YouTube, similar kind of situation. And TikTok is nowhere in corporate social media advertising budget, which is interesting given the extent to which it's becoming the default platform for consumers, as you'll see later. And then from a brand perspective, who manages the organization's social media accounts is really interesting to see the recovery of the PR teams, because PR took a beating last year, dropping down to 2% of companies allowing the PR team to oversee the account. Now that's come back to 8%, whereas the marketing department has dropped back to 32%, still leading the way. Marketing still controls, still the dominant player in terms of controlling the social media account, and then dedicated social media departments falling back slightly, but still a similar level to last year. It's really the PR team that has recovered the most. And then this is, of course, a significant question for companies looking to see whether they're going to continue spending in social media. Has it brought brand returns? Yes, 69%, more than 2/3 say it has. But bear in mind, that's the lowest since 2023. It had shot up over the last 2 years, and now it's dropped back again. But at the same time, a fair proportion are not sure. They're not measuring brand returns in social media. So they're just throwing darts at the board and hoping they will stick. More than a quarter of respondents are at that level. So when you add the unsures and the yeses, then you could say that a similar level over the last 2 years have seen brand returns. When you look at the flat out no, it's we haven't got back to the levels of 2023 and 2024, where almost 1 in 10 said that it was definitely not bringing in brand returns. Now it's quite minimal. And then when we ask what returns has it actually brought, far and away, the most significant return is brand awareness. But my gut feel is that is the easy way out. You can claim brand awareness if you can't prove actual return on investment. And you can see that from the sales proportion that previously was massive, above the 40% mark, and now it's dropped to below the 30% mark, whereas greater appeal to targeted audiences has increased a little, and you've seen areas like customer insights and improved brand loyalty, etc., falling back, inbound traffic falling back, increased market share falling back. Customer satisfaction has increased though, and that, generally speaking, probably justifies the improved brand awareness figures. But watch those sales numbers and that drop in sales numbers, because that tells you why return on investment is a dodgy question for corporate social media spend. Then we look at live event platforms. And what's interesting here is to see that almost all the platforms have dropped substantially from a proportional point of view. So Facebook Live and YouTube Live have dropped to a similar extent. TikTok Live, similar. And we've seen the proportion that say they use none increasing to well above the 50% mark. So live events have not really worked for corporates in social media. Do they plan to use live event platforms in the future? The proportion has dropped significantly over the last 3 years, and it's now below the level where it was in 2023. So we again can expect social media live events not to play a significant role in corporate lives. This one I found fascinating. Have you allocated budget towards new technology for marketing purposes? And we've seen a proportion drop to its lowest in 3 years. Only 55% have allocated budget for new technology. It's almost to the level where it was back in 2021. And the enthusiasm that we saw in 2024 has started dissipating. Those who outright say no are now almost precisely half of the respondents. So new technology is not working out yet for the large corporations, or at least half of the large corporations. So they don't want to spend until it's proven. And AI in particular still has to prove itself in the marketing environment. When they are spending it, though, what are they spending it on? And the big one, of course, is AI search and chat. They want to be there. They want to be found. And then close behind that is AI in general. Cloud applications substantially behind that. Machine learning further behind, and chatbots themselves further behind. Personally, I've been so underwhelmed by chatbots. And I'm talking about the dedicated chatbots you find on sites. I have yet to find a truly useful chatbot on a South African corporate website. So it's a lot easier for the corporates to invest in search, rather, to be found in the chat platforms rather than on their own chat bots that they install on their sites. We move now to the social consumer. And this is the data from the Ask Africa TGI survey that we've analyzed. So fascinating to see amongst active users, and that's people who've used the social media platform in the last month. Facebook making a strong recovery after dropping last year, 61.8%, the highest proportion yet of South Africans using it actively in the last 30 days. But far more dramatic is the rise of TikTok over the last 3 years in particular, from 34% in 2023 to 47.9% last year. Bearing in mind, this is the 2 waves of research that were conducted for the TGI survey over the previous year. And they divided up amongst wave A, wave B, and then the combination, which is C. And this is the combined data from last year, which is why we're talking about 2025, not 2026, because it's a full year's data. But having said that, the rise of TikTok is a juggernaut. It's a steamroller that is coming for all other social networks. But at the same time, Instagram has recovered well too. It was fairly steady the previous 2 years, and suddenly it's jumped up to a third of South African adults using it. Twitter has remained steady. You could almost say it's a win for Twitter to go up from 19.1 to 19.9%. But when you compare it to how Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook have performed, then the word to use there is stagnant rather than stable or steady. And that's reinforced by the fact that LinkedIn has jumped from 12 to 15 to 19% of consumers using it. So LinkedIn has almost caught up with X/Twitter. Fascinatingly, Pinterest has made an appearance as a significant force, 15% now using it, up from 12 the year before, just under 10%. And then Threads is a really interesting one because it arrived at the big bang and then it became meh. What's the big deal about it? But yet 1 in 10 South African adults over the age of 15 are using it. Just to put that in global context, Threads globally is used by 1 in 7 Facebook users. So bear in mind that Threads users typically have been migrated or at least pushed from Facebook into Threads. So they have a massive potential user base. Globally, 1 in 7 have been convinced to try Threads. In South Africa, that proportion is 1 in 6. So South African users are slightly more intensive users of Threads, but we follow the global pattern. And we've included Reddit for the first time here because it's suddenly a substantial number, 8% of South Africans using Reddit, up from 5%. Proportionately, you could argue that's the biggest jump, but the most dramatic jump here is TikTok. Let's look at the demographics of users. With Facebook, we are now seeing a fairly similar penetration amongst the younger age groups, 15 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 44. It only drops off after 44 years of age. And this applies to both active users and highly active users. Highly active users are those used in the last 7 days. And it only drops off significantly after age 65. But even there, a third of people are highly active users, which is still significant. And it shows how Facebook remains a default for South Africans as a social media platform. Interesting when one looks at the relationship between personal income, however, and both usage and highly active usage. There's a direct correlation between income and usage, with those earning over 18,000 Rand having 81% penetration versus that average in the low 60s. People are always puzzled by the fact that it suddenly jumps up at those lower income bands. But what you're seeing there is typically students or young people who live in households where they have access to Facebook because the household is connected, and therefore they take advantage of the household connectivity. So young people, students, even school kids earning a small amount of money, but having access at a similar level to those earning more than a few thousand Rand, for example. It's only when it comes to no income that it then follows that same trend. So if you took the 1K to 1,999 and the up to 999 bands out, then it would still follow that perfect downward curve, showing direct correlation between income and usage. TikTok, not quite the same with regard to the age of users. We've seen that the youngest grouping is no longer the dominant grouping, and this shows the migration of users as they age, or rather the rising age of the early user base coming into the 25 to 34 age group. And from there on, you see a significant correlation between usage and age, with 1 in 5 of those over 65 being highly active users. The income bands are very similar to those for Facebook users. We're seeing also the direct correlation between income and usage, both active and highly active users. And again, those two low bands of income, if you took them out and you just went from 2K down to no income, then it would also follow that perfect curve downwards. Instagram users, interesting to see that the first three age groups have almost become equivalent to each other, both in active use and in highly active use. But the over 65s are not impressed with Instagram. And there you see a significantly lower level of usage or active usage. Almost the exact same correlation between income and usage. So again, the curve drops. If you take out those two income bands, the low, let's call them the student income bands, then you would have a direct correlation between income and usage, as well as highly active use. X is a really interesting one because we're seeing the greatest penetration being amongst the 25 to 34s, and a similar penetration amongst the younger and the slightly older group. And then it drops off dramatically down to the 65 pluses, where highly active use is only 5%. So you could almost say the old timers have no patience with the nonsense that goes on X. And then look at the income band correlation as well. A far more precipitous drop in terms of the relationship between income and usage, as well as highly active use. And here you see the lowest regular income band, the 2K to 2499, being very similar to the no income band at all. So this one I would like to interpret as the fact that the greatest penetration of X is amongst those with higher income, and therefore more money and time on their hands, and more, I would say, entitlement, because the higher your income, the more entitled you feel. And I would argue that this indicates that entitlement is actually the fuel for the toxicity of X/Twitter. We can argue that one. It's a great argument to have. And then LinkedIn remains a fascinating arena because it tells us a lot about the working environment and the mobility, the upward mobility of young people. The 25 to 34s are far more likely to be using LinkedIn. 24% penetration amongst those using it, and then 16% for highly active users. Not massive, but still bear in mind this is a professional network. And you can see that reflected in the fact that retirement age 65 plus, the highly active use drops dramatically down to 5%. And then when it comes to personal income, it's a similar situation as with the other social networks, but quite a dramatic increase in usage and active usage when you are in the higher income levels. So it's almost as if the lower income bands comprise people who are struggling to get by, and only once your income rises, you start looking at how you can rise up the corporate ladder. Now we come to instant messaging and looking at highly active instant messaging users. And we decided to look at that one because just active instant messaging users didn't show us much differentiation. But amongst highly active users, we see WhatsApp, 2/3 of South African adults over the age of 15 are highly active on WhatsApp. But Facebook Messenger, exceptionally high at 48%, because the prevailing sense is that WhatsApp is so dominant that no one else gets a look in. But there's Facebook Messenger at 48%. And one of the explanations for that is that Messenger is zero rated by some of the mobile operators, and therefore there's no cost to using it. You're not using data. So it's highly appealing to those who want to preserve their data or can't afford data. And then Apple iMessage is quite strong at 18%, and that reflects iPhone penetration. And then Snapchat and Telegram at fairly similar levels, and we'll interrogate that further in a moment. Looking at gender of users, it's fascinating to see that there's a statistically significant increase amongst female users compared to male users of WhatsApp. Facebook Messenger, very similar levels. Apple iMessage, similar. But Telegram, interestingly, statistically significant again, skewed towards male users of Telegram. It's a low proportion, 1 in 10, but bearing in mind that Telegram came from nowhere in the last few years, it is telling. Now we look at age breakdown of highly active users, and we see with WhatsApp, it's only after 65 that it drops off significantly. With Facebook Messenger, we see an increase as people go from the youngest users to those in the 25 to 34 age group, and then steadily drops off. iMessage remains fairly similar until age 64, and that's an indication that if you're an Apple user, you're going to use iMessage regardless. Snapchat only drops off slightly, as does Telegram. Again, if you use those, then it's not really a question of using it less with age. And in personal income, you have that correlation between between income and highly active use as well. But with WhatsApp, it's not a significant difference. It ranges from 45% in the lowest regular income group, at 2K to 2.5, up to 86% for the highest income group, which is not as dramatic a spread as you would expect. Messenger is probably the most steady in terms of penetration of income bands, from 31% up to 63%. But the moment you go to the slightly higher income bands, it jumps up significantly in usage. And that tells you it's not only about a Messenger being zero rated, but also it's about people having the education to understand that this is a way to save on data costs, for example. Looking at the socioeconomic levels, which is what the metric that Ask Africa developed for the TGI survey, that is more in step with understanding people's status in life versus the old lifestyle indicators. And here we see a dramatic correlation between socioeconomic level, the highest income and lifestyle level, having 93% penetration of WhatsApp, dropping down to a very low 13% among level 10. And this is the clearest indication of where the differences lie in social media usage. It's not in as much in income or age as it is in socio-economic level. And that applies across the board. You look at Messenger, which you would expect to be flatter because of that zero rating issue, but it rises from a very low 8% up to 68%, depending on your socio-economic level. iMessage has got probably the lowest spread, or the lowest difference between the lowest income levels and the highest income levels, because once you can afford an iPhone, you're probably going to be using iMessage. It still drops off significantly at the lowest socioeconomic level, but above that, there isn't a massive spread between them. And then, interestingly, with Telegram, the lowest socioeconomic levels barely use it. And then I want to conclude with this great quote from our report from Tim Spira, the head of marketing insight and technology at Investec, because it says so much about the industry survey in particular. He says a lot of brands are about to discover that what they took for loyalty is just the customer's lack of time and energy to find a better option. When agents make it effortless to evaluate and switch, brands will have to compete on genuine value. And that's going to be the next phase of AI in the social media environment and the corporate marketing environment and corporate activity in general, is agentic AI, which is going to streamline activity for both organizations and for consumers. It's also going to streamline brand loyalty, and it will show where the consumers' needs and interests truly lie. So I think we're going to see a fascinating shift in both the social media landscape and the landscape of AI use in corporate marketing in the coming years. And I'm looking forward to that ride as much as I've enjoyed the AI ride of the last few years. Thank you very much.
Great, Arthur. Thank you very much. Some great insights. And guys, Arthur really touched the surface of the data and the insights and the information that's in the social media landscape report. So Ed has put it up. You can download it anytime you need. You can get the executive summary. Please, I'm reminding you, please ask questions. This is your opportunity to get more insights. We've got a great panel here that can provide some great information around social media usage, etc. So please ask questions in the comments and we'll try and answer as many as we can. So Arthur, just two questions from me before we get to the rest of the panel. There's this discrepancy between the rise of TikTok, but from a consumer perspective, but not necessarily from a brand perspective. Why do you see that? Why do you see that happening?
I think there is sheer terror among the brand custodians of TikTok because it is so dominated by young users, and the trends that shape TikTok are so ephemeral and can shift overnight. And that is something that doesn't sit comfortably with corporate planning. You're typically planning a budget over the next 1 to 2 years. And the TikTok user is changing their entire thinking around TikTok I won't say every 48 hours, but certainly every few weeks. And it will become every 48 hours, so it becomes even more scary for big brands.
Yeah. Then one other fascinating insight. Almost all social media platforms, according to the TGI survey, has increased. I mean, there's more and more people, or even our report has increased. There's lack of time. Some people feel that there's a lot of bots and a lot of AI, and they're not really going onto social media as much. Why do you see the growth on all of them and not just some of them? Because it looks like all have increased in viewership.
There's a few issues there. One is that traditional media is declining continually. We're seeing the numbers, for example, for print publications are still declining rapidly, still alarmingly small compared to what it was a few years ago. So people have to turn elsewhere to find the news, or it's because they're turning elsewhere that they are turning away from print media. And social media is far more accessible than any other form of media. It's a way that people can get a quick fix as well. And I think we'll see that continue in the coming years. And once print media dies completely, which it will eventually, then social media will become the default for getting your news for everyone.
Okay, let's get to the panel. So let's talk about this human quotient and measuring how much authentic connections remain a really important part of the brand work. And we're seeing that the data shows that South African brands are using heritage storytelling. And those that do actually outperform the others that use AI-generated content. Tamela, from your perspective, working because you one of the brands and work within this content, what does heritage storytelling look like from your organization's perspective?
So in terms of, I think more emotive marketing is the key that we look at, and also culturally relevant content. So what Arthur was saying, most brands try to shy away from, we actually walk into, right? So we look at it more from a cultural zeitgeist perspective, as in what are some of the human tensions that exist as shared experiences that our brand can resolve. And also further to that, we try to make sure that we always keep a human element, specifically in emotive stories that live in a shared experience environment. So broadly, when you look at then how AI starts to intersect with that, there's three categories of content that you can look at. The first is intrinsic, which basically speaks to intrinsically, what does a product do? This is Powerade showing you that something inside the bottle is blue and it has electrolytes. Extrinsic speaks more to the emotional benefit a product should give you. And then there's occasion based. Occasion is basically, when do you use said product? So when it comes to integrating AI into workflows with regards to delivering content, you want to include it in not all of them, but more in the intrinsic one, because it's necessarily kind of generic product comms, if you will. And then when it comes to the external or emotional benefit a product should deliver you and your family, that's where you want to keep the story as close to 100% human as possible. Occasion-based, it varies depending on when you want people to use your product.
Karen, from your perspective, anything you'd like to add around the human authenticity side of the business, and how do you plan to utilize it going forward?
From our side, everything within the platform needs to have a human link, and it needs to be believable. So in our world, we use AI very much kind of under the covers, just to help us drive efficiency, to help drive our new content that's been written.
Sorry, I'm not sure if it's sorry, Karen, I'm not sure if it's my side, but there seems to be a feedback on your yeah, that sounds a lot better. Thank you. Yeah.
Is this better?
Much better. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I think from our side, everything that we choose to do online is very much authentic. It's human. It's written by humans. It's created by humans. And we use AI kind of in the background just to sense check ourselves and to check that, there's no typing errors and the construct is correct. But I think still as brands, we need to show up very authentically. Our stories are real. They're not made up. Our images are real. And I think that kind of, if we look at most of our brands, we really want to continue to elevate that human element. We're dealing with people after all. And so it's very important for us that we tell stories that people can relate to, and we show up in a way that's relatable. I think the online world, often with this content, you look at it and you sit as a consumer really just questioning, is this real? Is it AI? And I think so many people have been duped. And as a brand, we've made a conscious decision that we're not going to follow that. We're going to do things that make sense for our brand, make sense for our consumers, and stay true to who we are at our core.
Cool. Dr. Mark Nasila, this data space must be the most incredible thing for a person who works within the data analysis space. What are the insights and that you could give people that are listening now from a high level perspective, ideas that they can use from an effectiveness perspective, from a measurement perspective? What do you find social media can generate for brands specifically? Obviously, from an F&B perspective, not giving away any strategy, but just really from a high-level perspective.
I think, thank you so much. I think it's important that from a social media perspective, we understand that while this technology has improved so much, from when it was invented about 3-4 years ago. Today, the likes of Facebook, the likes of TikTok, almost run automated backends. They drive personalization. But having said that, the AI we're talking about has a lot of limitations, and it's important to just rely on it as a tool and have that human touch. Some of the limitations, I will tell you, you see, brands are very cognizant of identity. They're very cognizant of values they begin with. The technologies we're looking here, they basically predict either the next word or based on information you provided. And maybe you could limit it to gathering information, to performing personalized research. But at the end of it all, you still need a human touch to drive home and make sure that those values are represented. People have a trust problem with AI today, especially on social media content around identity. We've seen images that, for example, sometimes you feel they're not representative, or even hallucinations that we've seen in other industries that might directly affect the messaging. I don't know if you remember the example of an airline company that used a social media platform to market, a promotion, and they ended up making a mistake, or I think offering tickets for like less than $10, and the company lost a lot of money because of that. And this is why it's critical to just use it for, things that are optimizable. But when it comes to stuff that is, personalized values, it's important that the human is held accountable for that.
Yeah, I'm sure you must be loving all this data, Mark, specifically in your space. Jazile, from a TGI perspective, so anecdotally, when we presented last year's social media landscape report, specifically to the universities, a lot of university students were saying that they're now off social media, they don't want to be on social media. And when we asked them why is that, a lot of them said because of bots, because of AI, and they're losing that authenticity. But when you're looking at your reports, we see actually there's still a lot of people that are on social media. Are you seeing a change over the periods, and what are the changes that you're seeing from a consumer perspective, so that brands really understand where should they be putting their money in?
Yeah, thanks, Oresti. Lovely to be here. So just in terms of why we are seeing that resurgence back to social media, especially amongst the youth, is more around them using social media as their search engines and for that discovery in terms of brand content. So they are rather using that to really get information, understand how brands are sort of wanting to further engage with them. So from a social discovery, that's why we're seeing that resurgence, particularly amongst the youth, to really get information around brands and product and content, and look at social media from an inspiration perspective as well.
So thanks, Jazile. So obviously, from an Ornico perspective, measurement plays a huge role in terms of how we advise brands. Arthur, the industry survey shows a clear shift from revenue-based KPIs towards engagement and sentiment analysis, particularly striking on platforms like TikTok and even LinkedIn. At the same time, we're seeing a 40% of marketers cite budgets constraint as a significant barrier up dramatically up from 28%. So you've witnessed multiple cycles of digital transformation in South Africa. Is this metric shift a sign of marketing maturity, where we're finally measuring what matters, or are we still potentially retreating to vanity metrics because we can't prove ROI?
It's probably a combination of those, Oresti. I think it's not so much vanity metrics as confusion about which metrics will convince the board, for example. But it definitely does relate to, as you say, not being able to prove ROI. And looking at the trends over the years, we've seen that when you can't measure ROI, you tend to look at other metrics that you can measure and that sound impressive. There was a time when it was all about engagement. For example, how many likes you got and how many views you got. But what that hid away was the extent to which budget was being thrown at exactly getting those or achieving those measures. So if you're spending to get the likes and the comments and the follows, etc., it truly is, as you say, a vanity metric. But if you're spending the money on that, you want to also prove that it works. So you use those metrics as the proof that it works. It's almost a circular argument that convinces the uninformed, but is completely useless as a true measure of ROI. So we're almost seeing an evolution of that same issue. It's not quite as circular as it was in the past. You're no longer seeing people saying, look how many likes we got. I haven't heard any big brand talking about that for the last few years. But we're now moving back into a territory of brand awareness, which is almost as nebulous.
To Melo, I know this is a broad question because it depends on messaging, it depends on demographics, etc. So I'm looking at it from a high level perspective. How is Old Mutual measuring success and return on investment on social media?
So in terms of broad strokes, again, just around how we measure success, for us, it all comes down to how does the social media activity we do get people into and down the funnel to ultimately get to either that lead aspect or a sales opportunity, right? It's more so about how we can get consumers to engage with the brand and spend as much time with us as we can get from them in the social media landscape, as opposed to 1 second views here and there, 3 second views here and there, unskippable ads and so forth, but rather really trying to grab that attention and use it as a consideration driver into the lower parts of the funnel. So we look at it more from a leads generation perspective and then leads to business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose the reason why we do marketing is that we can increase revenue. So absolutely. So, Karen, I think, and this is to Karen and Mark, I mean, one of the most striking findings in this report is that 30% of marketers cite lack of management understanding as a significant barrier. And only 50% strongly agree that senior management fully understands why we're using social media, despite 54% of those same leaders believing that social media has a potential to grow. This disconnect is actually costly. From your experience, what's the most effective way you found to translate social media value to the C-suite who may not be digital natives? So let's start with Karen.
Thanks, Oresti. I think we've spent a lot of time in the background really bringing our executives on the journey with us, not just from a performance-led perspective, but also from an insights-led perspective. So we spend a lot of time focusing on what our consumers are saying about our brand online, what are they concerned about, what are they happy about, and how does that obviously drive potentially behavior change within the organization to do things differently or better. So from a servicing perspective, what does that mean? And how do we deliver those insights and then make that change? So we've used social media not just from a business bottom line perspective, but also from an insights-driven perspective to show how, feedback online, when you take that feedback and you make an incremental change, how things then shift. And it's not always a direct kind of contributor to your business bottom line, but it certainly is a big factor in terms of experience and how our clients obviously experience our brand online. And we've seen certain trends go downwards in our favor around how our clients and customers are experiencing us, what they think about our servicing, our product, our offering, etc. I think it's also important to note that, you know, we've done a lot of work to go that social media is not the silver bullet, and is not the kind of that thing that is going to either drive ROI or not. We do see it as a coordinated omni-channel part of our strategy, and has a significant part to play, but is not just the only standalone around whether we're successful or not. And kudos to our management. They've been very open about understanding, and they've also been open around going, we don't understand how this works, or what do you mean by that? So it's been a journey of a couple of years, but there certainly is more, I suppose, buy-in from senior management around the importance of social media, and what people have to say, and not just purely a marketing platform that we put some money behind.
Yeah, I think that has been a consistent research that I've seen for 40 years since Ornico started, that if you're using more than one platform, you actually get more awareness, more understanding, rather than just sticking within a particular platform. Even 40 years ago, whether it was just radio, just television, or just billboards, if you're kind of combining the platform. So with social media, I think that's just an added platform, and you need to share it across many of the different other platforms as well to actually get awareness. Mark, still sitting with ROI, sitting with management understanding. We in our industry, a lot of the times, have particular terminologies. Is it the way we utilize those terminologies and actually simplifying the language? Will that help management really understand what we're doing and how we're doing what we do? Sorry, you're on mute, Mark.
It's a combination of factors that goes beyond simplifying. We're also talking about, we understand that some of these channels are a way of us maintaining our communication with some of our clients or customers, and in one way of solidifying our value proposition. So, for example, today, if you go to LinkedIn, you'll see we talk about advice a lot, because we know very well there is presence there. But having said that, some of the value, the return on investment, is presence and consistency in putting the message out there, not necessarily direct monetary value. We are also aware that not every customer is on a social media platform. So there's some we actually have, for example, the relationship managers, get in touch with them through their emails, or call them personally, because that's where their trust has been built around. But it's a constant messaging, because we're in a very competitive market at the moment. And sometimes your brand can lose value because you're not present, you're not connected on an ongoing basis. The last part is, it's a way of getting feedback. Today, customers are not shy to provide you good or negative feedback on the social media platform. And that's one way of using that feedback to design better products and services for them on an ongoing basis.
Okay, great. Ed says to me there's 2 questions here. How can brands understand return on advertising investment when there's so much AI in the social media space? Melo, should we start with you quickly?
Sure. I think when we look at ROAS, what becomes important is not necessarily the amount of clutter that exists that's being generated from an AI slop perspective, but rather what in truth can we find looking at last touch attribution in terms of our channels, and then also understanding what the bigger job of your overall media mix looks like and what it's trying to achieve, right? So it's almost separating the 2 issues, because it does make it a little bit harder to tell which parts of your brand are working from a social media perspective, given the noise that's in the market from an AI slop point of view. But at the same time, given your overall objectives and how you've used all the channels to benefit your business, you're still able to pull out a fairly accurate view of what's happening from a return on ad spend perspective.
Sometimes also with social media to actually quantify advertising spend becomes a little bit more difficult, specifically in the digital space, because those numbers are not as readily available as many of the other, specifically amongst competitive information, etc. One final question, because we are running out of time and I'm cognizant that people need to leave. Are we seeing any signs of screen fatigue or a drop in social media returns as the space becomes more cluttered? And Jazila, I suppose that's more within your space. Are we seeing those screen fatigues?
Yes, I would say that we are seeing that, and that speaks to engagement quality that we are seeing from what's available on social media, and a drop in engagement quality by virtue of there being so much clutter. But a way for brands to then essentially break through is really build in that cultural fluency in terms of their communication and what's available on social media, as a way of mitigating against that fatigue and information overload, but really build meaningful communication that is culturally relevant and culturally fluent.
Well, guys, we've run out of time. I cannot believe how quickly time passes when you're having fun. Really, Arthur, I appreciate your time and effort in putting this all together, and it's been a really incredible journey that we've gone on. And to Ask Africa and TGI, thanks for your insights always. And to our three panelists, Mark, Tumela, and Karen, thanks for joining us. And the team at Ornico, Ed, Wanga, and Jess, really thanks for everything, and thanks for putting this report, which is a huge report. So, guys, Ed has sent out a link to the report. There's some incredible information, and as I've said before, we do it so that the industry really understands what's going down within the social media space, because sometimes there's opaque areas within social media. So here's an opportunity to really understand what is going down. So thank you everyone for participating, and to next year, thanks a lot.
Thank you.